the financial system that we have now, using the interest rate and lending as a motor of economic growth is actually one of the main determinants of increasing wealth inequality. We know as business people that if you want to borrow money from a bank, the one sure way of getting money is to already be wealthy. The bank will lend against people who have assets. Yeah, people who are poor, who don't have assets, can't borrow from the bank. So what happens then is that if you have a society in which many people have business ideas, the ones who actually get the capital are the ones who are wealthy, because they have the security to offer as collateral to the banking system. And that keeps the wealth circulating within the wealthy, right? If you have an equity-based system, the investor's only chance of making a profit is not by taking security on your house and selling it if your business goes bad. Yeah? It's by sharing your profit. Yeah? So they want to invest in people who have good ideas and who make profit, right? And a poor person can have just as good ideas as a rich person, right? So under the equity system, the key is not the level of wealth that you already have when you make your application for finance. The question is, how good is your idea? How good is your management? How good is your experience? And wealth is not such a central determinant of who gets the funds under an equity-based system. So I would actually say that, to welcome uncertainty and treat it in the right way actually is not only just morally, it's actually something which helps us from the economic point of view to reduce the terrible wealth inequality that we're suffering.
Yeah, I should say here, we've hosted Michael Saylor, and in my book, The Fiat Standard, it's kind of like a user manual to how to use the fiat system, based on the fact that it is a monetary system that is inflationary. Saylor he says this is what rich people do everywhere. I think it's very correct, and when you understand how fiat works, it makes a lot of sense. What rich people do everywhere is that they have assets and they borrow against them, and they borrow in the currency that is depreciating, and so their debt is constantly getting cheaper to repay, and they generate cash flow from these businesses that more than covers the debt, because the debt is very long term, and so they just keep rolling it over and they live off of it. And the way that this system is done, the way that this system works, is that it allows people who own money, who have wealth, to just keep the wealth there without having to actually do anything with it, just use it to borrow against it. And this is effectively what Saylor is doing with Bitcoin, in that he's borrowing fiat, using his company to borrow fiat to buy Bitcoin, which it's a great, because it's kind of it's the way that we euthanize this insane system where everybody keeps borrowing and then buying Bitcoin. Eventually we end up with more Bitcoin than US dollar debt, and eventually we euthanize the bond market, and people use Bitcoin as their saving, as their medium of saving. I mean, this is really the plan. I've said this before. The appetizer for Bitcoin is the gold market. We're going to take the share of gold as a store of value, but the main course is the bond market. The main course is people stop holding bonds for the long term, and they start holding equity and Bitcoin. And Bitcoin,
well, it's a kind of crunch point that's coming, in the sense that the bond market has been held up by creation of fiat money. Governments have been supporting bonds, and yet that very act supports the price of bonds, stops them falling, stops the interest rates going up. So you have an inflationary environment which keeps the interest rate low, which is an astonishing kind of contradiction, in economic terms. Where that resolves itself to is a very interesting point, actually, that's coming, I think, fairly soon.
Yeah, and I think the way to think of it is that initially people used to save in gold, and then they took the gold and then they gave them physical money and told them it's okay. You'll get, it's going to be better because you put the money in a bank account and you get an interest rate, and you don't need the physical gold. That was like the 1930s, and bank interest rates for a while could keep up with inflation, but that of course was unsustainable, and it led to banking crises and all kinds of problems, and then interest rates went down. And then they couldn't keep up with inflation, so you had to go to the bond market to save. And that was, of course, great for the government, because you're buying bonds from governments, and that's financing them, and that's allowing them to create money and create debt and spend insane amounts of money on all kinds of insane sorts of things. But that was also a Ponzi, and it was not sustainable. So the bond market couldn't keep up, and now the bonds don't beat inflation. So people have moved to stocks. Now stocks are the way to beat inflation, and so people put their saving account in the stock index, which basically is the way to try and beat inflation. If you don't have access to the stock index, you're getting ruined by inflation. You have no easy refrain from it. It's just constantly robbing everybody in the world who has cash and bank accounts as saving assets, and rewarding people who have access to U.S. government credit at low interest rates. So it's a massively unfair system, but it's coming, I think, to a point. I mean, it is an unsustainable Ponzi, and I think the way out of this is Bitcoin.